Helen Cruz has lived in Grants Pass, Oregon for about 40 years, but for the last 5 years, she's been without a home. She is not alone in this situation. Her small mountain town, with a population of 39,189, does not have public homeless shelters. Currently, up to 600 people are experiencing homelessness there. On Monday, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments regarding the right to sleep outside, which has become a key issue for people like Helen. Back in 2013, Grants Pass began penalizing the growing number of homeless people by fining and issuing trespass orders with criminal penalties for sleeping in public spaces, even if they had only a blanket. By June's end, the Supreme Court will decide whether homelessness without a designated place to go is a constitutional right or a crime. Some of the Supreme Court's conservative justices appeared to support Grants Pass' position. Chief Justice John Roberts asked if the city's rules would be okay if nearby towns had vacant shelter beds. The court's decision could have a broader impact, potentially affecting over 650,000 people who are homeless at any given time across the United States. If the court allows Grants Pass to criminalize homelessness, other cities might follow their example. Justice Sonia Sotomayor asked, "Where do we put them if every city, every village, every town passes laws like this? Where are they supposed to sleep?" Despite having a job as a house cleaner, 49-year-old Cruz cannot afford a hotel or an apartment. She also received over $295 in fines for sleeping in public parks. When homeless people like her returned to parks after receiving tickets, the city code allowed police to arrest them. The unpaid fines lowered their credit scores, and jail records appeared on background checks, making it harder to find stable employment and permanent housing. Ed Johnson, Oregon Law Center's Director of Litigation, who filed the lawsuit against Grants Pass over the fines, said that these punishments do not help solve homelessness, but make it worse. He believes they increase the number of people who cannot escape homelessness. Although housing experts agree that civil and criminal penalties are ineffective, both conservative and liberal local governments are turning to them in an effort to address the public's concerns about homelessness without tackling the root cause: the lack of affordable housing. America lacks 7.3 million affordable rental units to meet the demand. About 22.4 million renters are spending more on rent and utilities than what is considered financially wise. This mismatch between supply and demand is leading more people to face housing instability. In January 2023, a point-in-time count found that over 650,000 Americans were homeless, which is the highest number since the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, began tracking this in 2007. Because of this, homelessness is becoming a more noticeable issue, causing public pressure on elected officials to address the problem. Ann Oliva, CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, states that officials are reacting politically instead of strategically, even though criminalization has proven ineffective. Helen Cruz, a homeless woman, remarks, "They'd rather push us all out of town, pretend we don't exist, or ignore the problem." Ed Johnson, a legal aid attorney with nearly 30 years of experience, heard in 2016 that unhoused people in Grants Pass were being fined and arrested. After visiting the parks, he was surprised to find that people were indeed being woken up at night by the police and told there was nowhere they could legally sleep in the town. These weren't just warnings. People were actually fined, arrested, and jailed for criminal trespass. In 2018, the Oregon Law Center, with Johnson's help, filed a class action lawsuit against Grants Pass on behalf of an unhoused woman named Deborah Blake and others in similar situations. Sadly, Blake passed away in 2021, and the case now represents other homeless residents of Grants Pass. During the lawsuit's discovery phase, Johnson's team found evidence that the city aimed to make life so difficult for homeless people that they would leave the town. Back in 2013, city leaders discussed what they called a vagrancy problem in the parks. The ideas that came from their meeting were not about helping the homeless, but about getting rid of them. Suggestions included providing bus fare to send homeless people away, putting up most unwanted signs, and imposing fines. The city's final solution was to fine those who set up campsites in city parks, which was loosely defined to include any arrangement with bedding, a sleeping bag, or other material used for bedding purposes. Even having a single pillow or blanket met this criteria, according to the city's municipal code. A first-time offense carried a fine of $295, but if you didn't pay, the second fine jumped to $538. It costs more to camp in the park than to stay at a Hilton, says Brody Minter, Cruz's public defender. If someone got 2 or more citations within a year, the police could ban them from the parks. If those banned people were caught camping in the parks, they were prosecuted and sometimes jailed for criminal trespass, which could mean up to 30 days in jail and a $1,250 fine. The Grants Pass Municipal Code also prohibited sleeping on public streets, sidewalks, or alleys, and violations of this rule could also lead to fines. The city calls it camping, says Ed Johnson, but they defined camping in a way that means trying to stay warm and dry to avoid hypothermia. For those living outdoors, there was no way to avoid breaking this law. There weren't many other options. The median rent for a one-bedroom apartment was $1,250 a month, but the median per capita income was just $30,649. This meant that an average person would spend at least half their income on rent, making them severely rent-burdened, according to HUD. While Grants Pass has one Christian-run overnight shelter for adults, it only has around 100 beds. To stay there, people must attend daily religious services and avoid using drugs, alcohol, or nicotine. Even service animals aren't allowed. Jess Rabinowitz, Campaign and Communications Director at the National Homelessness Law Center, said, "There's literally no housing." He added that much of the city's approach to homelessness is based on the flawed idea that if you punish people enough, they'll choose not to be homeless. If the fines were supposed to motivate crews to stop being homeless, the opposite effect occurred. When you're living in a tent, you can't store food, so you have to buy it every day. You don't have electricity, so you have to buy batteries. You end up spending a lot of money just to survive, Cruz explains. The things people take for granted, like turning on a light, opening a fridge, cooking a meal. I can't do that out there. Housing experts disagree with this argument. People experiencing homelessness are much more likely to be victims of crime than to be the perpetrators, says Anna Leva from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. However, she adds, if there's criminal activity happening where people are staying, the police should handle it, as it usually has nothing to do with the encampment itself. Supporters of Grants Pass argue that this lawsuit and other rulings supporting the rights of unhoused people restrict what governments can do to address homelessness. In 2018, the Ninth Circuit ruled in Martin v. Boyce that cities in Idaho couldn't penalize people for sleeping in public when there weren't enough shelter beds. In a 2023 brief supporting Grants Pass, California Governor Gavin Newsom pointed out the impact of these rulings on Santa Barbara. When the city tried to ban sleeping in its downtown area during certain times, a court ruled that the plaintiffs had a plausible claim under the Martin case. Courts have stretched Martin's reasonable limit into an insurmountable roadblock, Newsom wrote, preventing cities and towns from imposing common-sense time and place restrictions to keep streets safe and move those experiencing homelessness into shelters. Despite these criticisms, housing experts point out that cities still have several ways to manage homelessness under the Ninth Circuit's interpretation. The court made it clear in the Martin v. Boyce case that it didn't require cities to provide physical shelter for everyone, nor did it mean that people could sleep anywhere and for any length of time. An ordinance prohibiting sitting, lying, or sleeping outside at certain times or in certain places might be constitutionally permissible, the Ninth Circuit said. Some cities have found success by banning daytime camping from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., requiring unhoused people to pack up their things every day before returning at night. Other cities have set up legal campgrounds to concentrate homeless people in less disruptive areas. The Supreme Court could clarify whether these enforcement methods are legal. But regardless of the High Court's decision, the homelessness crisis will likely continue, affecting people like Helen Cruz. She hopes the court will at least confirm that being homeless when there's nowhere else to go doesn't make her a criminal. Just because there's no white picket fence and no nice clothes, she says, doesn't mean that we're not human.